Hey everyone, welcome to Talks with Titans. At Prodigy Leadership Academy, we are on a mission to facilitate the passing of torches and wisdom from people who have lived lives of success and impact onto our students. In this week's episode, students Josie and Josiah had the opportunity to learn from Pastor Ron Watts. Pastor Ron achieved the rank of Eagle Scout and then went to the Oral Roberts University School of Theology, where he received a Master's of Divinity degree in 1985. Largely, his professional experience has been pastoring and serving the larger Christian church through the Methodist denomination. His first pastoral assignment was a 2-point charge in the Lead Belt area of southeast Missouri, serving the Leadwood and Irondale United Methodist churches. In 1988, he and his wife Linda felt called by God to move to Cape Girardeau for Ron to serve as the founding pastor of a new United Methodist church called LaCroix Church, which began in the fall of that year. In 1991, Ron was given the Harry Denman Evangelism Award for the work taking place at LaCroix, and he's been serving there ever since. I grew up going to LaCroix, so Pastor Ron was a voice of wisdom that spoke into my formative years, and I've always appreciated the way that he leads and teaches. And it's so cool to see a church in my area that not only disciples its local community, but also has a global reach and impact. And also, you don't pastor for almost 40 years without obtaining a lot of knowledge and wisdom, so you're about to hear some of it. Without further ado, here's Pastor Ron Watts.
Hey, it's so wonderful to have you join us for Talks with Titans today, and I've been very excited to talk to you, Pastor Ron Watts, and understand more about your background. I've been to your church many, many times. In fact, my wife and I were married there, and I know you've been an incredible influence for the kingdom of God in our community and even abroad. But I'm super excited to get a chance to dig into some of your background and just some of those deeper questions. And I especially am excited that you can pass some torches of wisdom and life experience to these two amazing Prodigy High School students. We have Josie and Josiah joining us today. And it'll primarily be you guys guiding the interview, but I can't hold back. Sometimes I'm going to have a question because I'm still a very curious person. So I will let you guys go ahead and get us started with the interview. But one thing I usually like to ask in the beginning is, can you tell us some things about your background, like your education and how you ended up maybe going in the direction of launching a church?
Okay. Yeah. I grew up in St. Louis in a neighborhood called Dogtown. It's between the Hill and Forest Park, and went to a little neighborhood church there. We walked every Sunday. Went to Southwest High School, and then stayed in town. I felt when I was 16 years old that God was calling me to be a pastor, and so I was still in high school, of course, so I'm thinking already in terms of future. So I knew I would have 7 years of school, undergrad and then graduate school. So I went to school at a community college, Merrimack Community College, for about a year and a half. Then I transferred to Missouri Baptist. It was college then. Now it's, they're all called universities now, right? And then I got my bachelor's there and then got married, and my wife and I, Linda, we moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma, where I went to Oral Roberts University School of Theology and got a Master's of Divinity, which is often required to be ordained.
Are you saying you thought you might be in ministry when you were only 16 years old? You already began to recognize this was a life direction?
Yeah, I had a really life-changing encounter with Jesus when I was 15, became a follower. I'd grown up in church all my life, but I didn't really know the Lord. I knew about God. And so when I was 15, I really encountered Jesus. And might have been 8 or 9 months later, I felt this impression that maybe I should be a pastor. Well, then there were like 2 or 3 people who came along and confirmed it, including my pastor. He stopped me in the hallway one day. I'll never forget. I remember exactly where I was and that the lights were half on. And he said, "Have you ever thought that God is calling you to be a pastor?" Now, see, I was fighting it. I was scared to death of the idea. I am very much introverted, and the thought of standing in front of people and talking terrified me. And so I fought it for a long time, but I finally surrendered. I was 16 years old, and I knew from then I was going to go into the ministry.
So how did you, pursue being a pastor, but you couldn't because you were 16? How did you gain interest in that?
Well, first, I had to finish high school. And it's funny, I didn't take school very seriously. until I met Jesus, and I thought, I probably ought to do better at this. And so basically had to finish school, and we had a group of students, all teenager high school students, and God did a work among us. I had this great community. And then to get ordained, I'd have to have a bachelor's degree and then a master's. So I decided, I think I'd stay in St. Louis and commute to school. So I kind of regret I didn't have the college experience. I'd never lived in a dorm or anything like that. But I commuted from there, worked. When I was 19, a freshman in college, I became a youth pastor of our home church. And I did that for 4 years. So that was my first real experience of leading anything, of teaching. And so we would have a youth group on Sunday night, as we called it then, and I would do a Bible study every Sunday night. And that was where my first experiences of teaching. And I did that for 4 years during my college years. It was great preparation for ministry. And then right before I moved, my pastor at home let me preach once. And I remember, I think it was a kind of an old-fashioned wooden pulpit, and I used to joke that there still are indent marks from me grabbing it so tightly that
Nervousness?
I squeezed it so hard. But yeah, and then I went off to seminary. We moved to Oklahoma.
So what was that experience like at seminary?
I had a great seminary experience. I really did. Felt God leading us there, and never lived outside of St. Louis. My wife and I both grew up in the same house. We were there all of our childhood and high school years, and we never moved. And so it was really a cool experience for us as newlyweds. We'd just been married 4 months to move to Tulsa, Oklahoma. Went to Oral Roberts University. The School of Theology there was only maybe 6 or 7 years old by then, but had some fantastic professors. And I loved my time there. I learned so much. I had a mentor. Well, in fact, one of the professors became a mentor he's sick right now, but he's been a mentor all my life. And so I had just a fabulous experience for those 3 years at ORU.
When you describe having a great mentor, and I'm sure that kind of experience and arrangement has been important to you throughout life, and you've been a mentor to many people, what do you think is key for a person to be a great mentor?
I think just giving time. We're so busy, especially now, and distracted. I think to be a great mentor is just to share your life with someone, and to be available. And the people who have mentored me, and I've been blessed to have some great mentors, and I've always sought out mentors, and they give you the gift of time, and that's one of the best gifts you can give anybody.
Practically speaking, how do you seek them out? Do you spot someone and you go and say, will you mentor me? Or how does that work?
Well, of course, in seminary, it was more natural. I took classes with Dr. Bob Tuttle and just loved him. And when you graduate, sometimes you leave and you never see the professors again, but he was someone I stayed in touch with. And it just developed more gradually with him. But I started writing him. This was before email, I would write letters, he'd write back, and that turned in, and we've had him preach at our church, 7 or 8 times. And we've just stayed in touch over the years. And then when, of course, email became, I sent him off a question. I say, I'm wrestling with this, and he's a real man of prayer. And he'd pray for me and with me. And there have been other times I've just sought out people and just hung out with them, and learned from them. But I would not want to go through life without great mentors, and I've been blessed to have some really good ones.
So being a pastor, you're probably a mentor to lots of people, or they think of you that way. So where do you get your mentors, being a mentor to others?
Where do I get my mentors? Yeah, I think it's oftentimes it's looking to people. Of course, now I'm 64, so the folks older than me, they're a smaller number. But mentioned Jerry Stone. Jerry is a mentor to me. I'm going to go meet with him here next week and just pick his brain about some stuff that I'm facing. And you know, some mentors become there. Some are more. You don't look at them this way, but they have specialized skills. Like when I'm dealing with a particularly tough staff thing, I might go to Jerry. You know, when I'm dealing with other issues, I might go to different people who have been hugely influential. Like Bob Tuttle was just always there. Like when I'm trying to wrestle through a theological issue, he would be my go-to. And so sometimes you'll find that certain mentors have just real certain gifts or skills. We all have different gifts, right? And some will have more specific gifts that really you think of, man, when I'm in this situation, I want to go to them.
Would you say you have a specific gift that you like to share with others?
You know, that's a good question. Often where I've mentored, it's been younger leaders who maybe are new pastors, young pastors. I feel special calling there because there's things I can share and talk with them about. You know, probably, and it's people who are in ministry in some form or fashion.
Do you have any like people you follow on social media or stuff like that, like bigger pastors of all these mega churches that you like to follow, and you kind of pick stuff that you see in their sermons or something like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've called them mentors from afar, people I've never met, who've had a huge influence in my life. You know, I think of like Rick Warren, who wrote the book Purpose Driven Life. Now, more earlier in my ministry, Rick Warren was this just fount of wisdom around leadership. And I was a young leader, and I just soaked up so much from him. I've never met and probably never will meet Rick Warren, but I got a lot of stuff from him, you know. And to this day, these are the kind of folks I seek out and try to learn from. And so, and some of them are younger. You know, the thing as a disciple, someone doesn't have to be older than you to be a mentor. Because the Holy Spirit lives in them and they've got something to share. I think today one of the great, inspirations is John Mark Comer is a real advocate of discipleship. Well, he's in his 40s, so he's a good 20 years younger than me, but I feel like I learned so much about discipleship from him. And it's just, you resonate with certain folks and you kind of veer that way.
Getting into the idea of ministry as a career, ministry as a lifelong, passionate journey. Mm-hmm. When you went that direction in your life, can you share a little bit about what joys, what challenges, and maybe surprises, things you didn't expect possibly, that you have discovered in the experience of ministry leadership?
Oh boy, I could talk a long time about that. First off, there were, my own fears, and it was one of those things that you lean on God's strength. God doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called. And I didn't have everything I needed, and that's how God often works. And so learning how to preach, learning how to lead a church. When I'm a young pastor, 25, my first two little churches I served in small town Missouri, everybody there could be my parent or grandparent. And so I really, one of the things there I learned, and I think was helpful, often God uses past experiences. When I was young, my father died when I was just 16 months old. And so my mom, this was back in 1961, my mom had to go to work full time, and there weren't many full-time working moms back in those days. And so she moved in with her parents. They were getting older, and they helped raise me. Well, that taught me I was around older adults. My mom had me when she was older, and then my grandparents, my grandpa, he was 91 when he passed away. And so I learned how to be around. My growing up experience really taught me how to relate to older people. So I'm a young pastor. I wasn't intimidated by older people. In fact, I loved being around older people. And so God used that experience. That was, one thing there. So many things along the way that you learn, but just even learning how to relate to people of different generations and being able to connect with them.
Going back to, like, you were a young pastor when you first started, I think you said 19?
I was 19 when I became a youth pastor. I didn't serve a church until I was 25. Now, some of my friends in seminary served churches during seminary. I didn't feel I was ready for that. I actually worked in an after-school ministry to children who were oftentimes not supervised, because their parents they're often single parents, and we had this ministry, this church did, and we would work with them after school. And then in 1985, when I was 25, I became a pastor. First time I was ever a pastor of a church.
So, like, the 19 to 25 time, was it ever awkward? Like, the age gap, like, youth goes till 18 maybe? So if you had an 18-year-old and you were 19, was that ever awkward, or like?
It's funny, in the youth group that I served at my church, most of them were freshmen, sophomore, or junior high. And it's funny, I used to, when you're 19, you think a 14-year-old is just so young. And now, these folks they're 59, they're older adults. They're just some of them were just 4 or 5 years younger. At the time, no, because you think you're so much older. It turns out they really weren't that much younger than me.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how did your church, LaCroix, start? What was the story behind that?
That's a great question. Has to go back, the seed was planted for me to be a church planter or start a new church when I was in seminary. When Linda and I were in Tulsa, we attended a new United Methodist church that had started maybe 3 or 4 months before we moved to town. And it was started by 3 of my seminary professors, who all were pastors besides being scholars and professors. And we got connected there. And for a while they met in a Catholic school like gym. And then from there we moved. Oral Roberts University there was this hospital. It's called the City of Faith, and it had the middle building had 60 floors. And our church actually met on the 60th floor of the City of Faith. We didn't have a building yet, so we met there throughout the rest of my time. And so both Lynn and I had grown up in old churches, very established churches. And so that was our first time being around a brand new church, and we loved it. We loved the environment. We met some really neat people there. And looking back, God planted a seed. I saw it. I'd heard of new churches, of course, but I'd never experienced one until then. Yeah. And so when I was, 27, a good friend of mine who I went to seminary with, we became best friends. He started a church a year before me, and he convinced me to go to the seminar that was put on by the Fuller Institute out of Fuller Seminary. It's called How to Plant a Church. And I said, I don't think this is for me, but my friend Stan kept pushing me. Okay, I'll go. So I go to this thing. It was a 4-day seminar out in Indiana. And it was great speakers and everything. And I drove away from there and I said, no, that is not for me. I am not a church planter. I have nothing in common with church planters. I can't do that. And so I got home, told Len, I said, yeah, it was great to be with Stan, but I'm never going to start a church. And then it was funny, in the fall of 1987, a long time ago, the Lord started speaking to me about, that was I guess that was spring. Yeah, it was the spring of that year. And Stan started his church a year, and I just started getting this impression that I was supposed to do this. Long story short, I get connected with a friend of mine who was serving as an associate pastor at a church here in town. And that conversation led to this thing because that church was talking about starting another church in town. And that's where it all started. And again, I wrestled with that because I had finally said, okay, God, if you want me to start a church, I'll start a church. And I just knew God was going to send me to St. Louis because both Lynn and I were from St. Louis. Our family was all there. I just knew that that's where I was going to go. And besides, every friend of mine who was starting churches were starting them in big cities. And so I thought, sure, God's going to call me to St. Louis. And then the door opens to Cape Girardeau? Are you kidding me? I'd never been to Cape Girardeau. I knew it was small. And so I come down, I meet with them, and I look around. I think, oh, this is nice to talk to my buddies, but no way am I moving to Cape Girardeau starting a church. And I wrestled with that for about 2 or 3 months. I was really convinced. It's funny how we think we know God's plans, right? And it became painfully obvious. And I say painfully because I just knew God wanted me to start a church in the shadow of Busch Stadium, because I'm a big Cardinal fan, and I just knew that I was supposed to be there. And it just became obvious. It's like one confirmation after the other. Go to Cape Girardeau. God did everything but write in the sky, go to Cape Girardeau. There was so many things happened. And I finally said yes. And that's where it all started. So we moved to town June 1st, 1988.
Has your church has it ever gone up and down, like times it could have stopped or it grown like abundantly or anything?
Yeah, any church start it's a risky business. I don't know what the current statistics are, but it used to be about half of all new church starts don't make it. They go going for a while and they stop. And that was early on. That was a fear I had to wrestle with. I was afraid I was going to come down here. The Methodist Church was going to invest all this money in me, and it was going to flop. That was just a fear. I'm going to disappoint everybody. I'm going to fail. But God blessed it, and so we met in the theater in the mall. There was back then the Marcus Theaters, you may be from, yeah. Well, that used to be called Warenberg, and they used to be in the mall. And that's where we started having services in the fall of '88. And so there was a lot of up and downs. But, the first year, I remember we started in the fall, and we were averaging about 120 in attendance. And then you get to the summer. Well, church attendance goes down in the summer in most any church. And so there were some Sundays where, it got down way under 100, and I was afraid. I thought, oh my, it's not going to make it. We're not going to make it. But then in the fall of, I guess, '89, people came back, attendance started growing, and I just began to see God's hand and grace, But yeah, there are, when you're starting a church, there's always these moments, And I remember somebody, one pastor, back then doing it that way was kind of different. Became more common, but in the late 80s, it was still sort of innovative. Most churches in the 70s, 50s, 60s, 70s started in houses. You'd get in a living room like this, and you'd get 10 people together and it'd grow. Well, we decided we were going to start with a bigger group from the beginning. And I remember a pastor, because a friend of mine told me, he said this, he said, they'll never get out of the theater. They're just never going to make it. And that was a discouraging comment, but God was faithful over and again. So yeah, there are ups and downs.
What advice do you have based on that experience? What helped you navigate through and stay persistent and get up and keep doing the things you need to do, even though you had those fears or even though doubts will creep in?
Yeah, that's a great question. And for me, it was connection with other pastors doing the same thing. And we were peers, so it's not like they were mentors, but we drew strength from each other. So my best friend Stan started a church in Fort Wayne, Indiana, a year before I did. And so he and I were on the phone. Now, this is before cell phones, so no texting, no email, We were on the phone like almost every day. And I'm saying, okay, I got this situation, Stan, what do I do? And it was my friends. It was my pastor friends who were a lifeline to me. I will tell you, I don't believe I would have made it. And God doesn't want us to do it alone, We're not designed to do it alone. And I had some wonderful friends, other pastors who went through that. And when I would get discouraged, and then there were times when I was able to give encouragement to them. My friend Stan, when we had our first service, he wrote me a letter the week before. And it was such a good, encouraging word. It was basically, you've done all the work, now God's going to make it grow. There's your part, there's God's part. Sit back and watch what God wants to do. I carried that note in my Bible for 20 years because it was this reminder that God is faithful. And there's my part and there's God's part. I do my part. I do it the best I can. I work hard. And then you leave the results to God. And so I carried that note for so long because I needed that word from my friend. It was the perfect word that I needed that week, you know? So, yeah, I wouldn't have made it without my friends.
Wow. So it's interesting because earlier you were talking about the importance of mentors, but now it's almost like equally important, perhaps, the peer group.
Oh, yeah.
The people that are kind of on the same playing field with you.
Absolutely. And different groups have different friends have come in at key times, and I couldn't get by without my friends. And it's just as true now. In fact, it's maybe even more true now as it was 35 years ago when we started.
Wow.
You know.
So, I guess, did you grow up in the Methodist Church?
I did.
Okay. So then how did that correlate to you going into that denomination? Or was there questions on, should I move somewhere else? Or
That's a great question. And yes, when I was called into the ministry, there were three churches that, there was our group, and God did this incredible work among the teenagers in our youth group. Not the one I led, but in the one when I was a teenager that was so powerful. And then our pastor left, and then the new pastor came in, wasn't the same, and spiritually things began to die down. So we found strength, Lynn and I were dating at the time, from other churches. And so I wrestled, do I stay in the United Methodist Church or do I go elsewhere? And I remember meeting with a pastor of a non-denominational church and talking to him about it, and he tried to just, encourage me to go that direction. And it was one of those things, sometimes God puts you somewhere, and you stay there till he directs otherwise. In the military, they say, obey final orders. What was your final order? You just stay and you do that. Mm-hmm. Until you hear otherwise, you do that. And so that's where I was. And I said, well, I'm going to keep walking down that path. And if God directs me somewhere else, we'll go somewhere else. But God opened the doors, and I entered the process of ordination in the United Methodist Church and stayed there. Yeah.
So would you still be considered a part of that? Because I know that there was something going on in your church a few years ago.
Well, last year, our denomination unfortunately went through a kind of a denominational split, and we disaffiliated from the United Methodist Church. But up until then, I was 38 years in that denomination. So.
I bet that was painful for you, or was it?
No, it was very painful. We did a discernment process at our church to decide to come to that place because I had good experiences. I was treated well, and this was my family, my extended family, my colleagues, pastors I had served alongside of for decades, and it was a very painful thing.
Along that line, as a church leader, I sometimes hear people who look at the different denominations within Christendom, and they see that as kind of a factious, like they're broken or their people aren't really unified or connected. I hear that sometimes from people about church denominations. Mm-hmm. And another thing I sometimes hear is, you don't need organized religious affiliation to be a follower of Jesus. You can just do that in a relational way on your own terms. I'm a spiritual person. What is your view on both of those things, different denominations, and also the idea of the importance of religious organization structure?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've encountered those comments hundreds of times over the years. You hear that all the time.
I bet.
As far as denominations, it takes all kinds of churches to reach all kinds of people, and I'm sure God's ultimate desire. Well, we know Jesus prays for unity, and He wants the church to be one, that they may be one. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean organizational or structural unity. While you can say, and I think appropriately so, that the existence of different denominations is unfortunate, it also helps you reach others. like even in our own split in the United Methodist Church, I'm convinced that at the end of the day, more people will wind up being reached by the different Methodist groups now than if we had stayed, one. So there's something to be said about that. And on the other side, a lot of denominations have certain gifts to give to the body of Christ.
Oh, interesting.
And there's unique things. Baptists are great at studying the Bible. They know the Bible. The Pentecostal and Charismatics are in touch with spiritual gifts. Methodists with discipleship. Lutherans that have such a respect for communion and the Lord's Supper. And I think there's so much we can learn from each other. And a lot of them have, real emphases that are beautiful. And all of this together is part of the Church of Christ, On the other side, and now I've heard many times, I don't want to be part of organized religion, and I usually joke back, I guess you want disorganized religion.
Interesting.
But God uses people and organizations and institutions. An institution is the container. It's kind of like when you buy a Coke, you want the drink, right?
You want it in something that'll hold it.
But you got to have something that holds it, right? That something that holds it is, an aluminum can or a glass bottle, which is the best way to drink Coke, glass.
And with ice.
With ice, yeah. But it's the container. The container is really important. It's like Paul talks about us being vessels unto honor or dishonor. The gospel is the thing that's so valuable. But you've got to have a container. You got to have something that holds that. Otherwise, God honors boundaries. Rivers need to stay within the banks, or it becomes a flood. Sports don't make sense without lines. You can't keep score. And so you need boundaries. And I think institutions have a beautiful part to play because they help hold the thing. The gospel is the treasure, but you need something to hold it. And so if it's not, if you just, say, well, I'm spiritual, but God made the church. We got to remember the church is Jesus' idea. He started it. Jesus said, I will build my church. That's why I never used the language that I built LaCroix. No. I preached, I planted seeds. And then Paul says, I planted, Apollos watered, but God caused the growth. And so that happens, and the Spirit does that. But you need other people. Jesus started the church; it's His idea. And so to do this solo kind of, well, I don't need the church. I'm spiritual. I don't need people, is really going contrary to what Jesus taught. He created the church. We need other people. We are collectively the body of Christ. And a body, Paul talks about that. You can't have just an eye or an ear or a hand. The body requires all the parts. And to have all the parts, you need different people. And it can be a small church. My first church had 30 people in it. Or it can be a really big church. But the idea is that we need each other.
The first thing God said was wrong with creation, that man was not meant to be alone.
That's right.
And so He gave Adam Eve.
That's right. We need each other. My mentor, Bob Tuttle, he has a lot of sayings, Tuttleisms we call them. And one of them was, and is, if you get singled out, you get picked off. Mm-hmm. So if you ever watch shows that have maybe a lion or wolves, who does the lion attack?
The singled out one.
The stray, the straggler. They don't attack the herd. They're afraid of the herd, but they'll go after the straggler. And we have an enemy. It says the devil roams the earth like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. And there's strength in numbers. Yeah.
You mentioned your church is LaCroix. What made you pick the name LaCroix?
Oh, well, that's interesting. Yeah, we, again, I didn't know Cape Girardeau. And, Cape has this interesting history that we were founded by French missionaries, but the French didn't settle Cape Girardeau. The Germans did, mostly, English and Germans. And so, but there's all these French names, right? Cape Girardeau is French. LaCroix, one of the first things the French missionaries did when they got here was they erected a cross down at the river. And there was a monument, very small, maybe 5 foot tall, concrete base with a real heavy metal, like I guess steel cross on it to mark the spot where the missionaries first put the cross. And they eventually that made its way out to Cape LaCroix Road. And a lot of things in town started taking on the name LaCroix. Well, LaCroix in French means the cross. And so we bought property on Cape LaCroix Road. And in fact, my district superintendent came up with a name. He suggested it to me one day, and so we called one of the French professors at SEMO. Said, what's the proper way to, pronounce, and what's the proper way to, spell it out? And it's 2 words: La Croix, the cross. So I've always loved the name. For several reasons. First, it kind of, plants us in Cape Girardeau, but also it's this word that's at the center of our faith, the cross. Yeah. So
how did that go about whenever you guys planted your location in Benton or wherever it is? I know you guys have a second location.
Benton. Oh, in Benton? Yeah, that was a situation where a small church was struggling, and they had a retired pastor, a pastor who had come out of retirement to serve them, and they didn't have anyone else to send to them to be a pastor. And so at the time, a district superintendent said, well, would you be open to letting LaCroix help serve and kind of provide a pastor? And that one thing led to another, and they voted to close the old Benton United Methodist Church and reopened. We closed it, we stopped meeting, kind of redid the building, renovated it so it would fit our style of worship, and opened back up as LaCroix Church Benton. It's a very small church. It's like diametrically opposite of Cape. It's a very small building in a small town, but a lot of beautiful folks there who are part of the church.
I'd like to get a little bit more information about the communication skills that you require. Earlier you mentioned that you're an introvert by nature.
Yeah.
And so being in front of people, being around people drains you maybe. It takes energy from you.
Yeah.
How have you coped with that over the many years that you've had to be in front of so many people and interact with so many people? That's one question. The other is, how do you plan sermons?
Yeah, that's good. As far as it's not so much the act of being in front, although I was also shy and didn't really want to be in front of people. If I go into a room of strangers, I'll be in the corner. I'm just not the one who's out there in the middle mixing it up, But I have learned over the years, now introverts love people. We get a bad rap sometimes. We just find strength being alone. My wife is an extrovert. When she's tired, she wants to be around people. That's where she gets energy. And I'm just kind of the opposite. So for me, when I'm at church Sunday and I'm shaking all kinds of hands and I'm greeting and I'm talking to everybody, I go home and I don't schedule things on Sunday afternoon. It's recovery time for me. I get alone. If it's in baseball season, I'll watch a Cardinal game or do something. I just need to recover. And I have one of the most important spiritual practices for me is, it's 2: silence and solitude. I start every day with about an hour quiet before God, prayer, listening, alone. And that strengthens me for the more draining aspects of being around a lot of people.
How do you consistently do that? Because I always try to do quiet time of some sort, usually. But I always struggle to consistently do that because human nature, you're busy and tired or not awake, right. So.
Well, for me, I'm a morning person, so the morning is my best time, and I get up before everybody else. Of course, we're empty nesters now, and there's certain seasons where it's really hard, I would say. When we had our 4 kids at home, and, inevitably you get this time alone with God, and then a baby starts crying, or one of them comes running down, "Hey, Dad," and they want to play. And so there's always a challenge, Now it's easier. I get up early because I just like the morning, and there's not many interruptions between 5 and 6. That's when I usually have quiet time. So I find that to be, I just have to schedule it. And you get into a routine. And, there are bad habits, but they're also good habits. And if you can establish a habit, it just becomes part of your day. It's something you're more likely to do.
Yeah. How do you keep it from getting like just another thing to your day? Because a routine eventually becomes boring or...
That's a great insight. It's like when you go to the gym and they give you this exercise routine, and first time you do it, your muscles are so sore, but kind of in a good way, it works you out. And if you do that for about 10 weeks, it doesn't even affect anymore. Your muscles just get used to it. I think the same is true for our spiritual disciplines. You got to mix it up maybe a little. And so sometimes in the morning, I'll read a lot. Sometimes I'll journal. Yeah. I use there's an app called Lectio 365. Sometimes I use that, but rarely, because I find if I get my phone out, it's a distraction. The phone's probably the biggest distraction from the spiritual life ever. So I will usually leave that off. But I try to mix it up. So sometimes I'll read maybe a large portion of scripture. Other times maybe something small. And I just find kind of doing that helps. I also will then, I like to walk. And I'll take my dog, and we'll walk anywhere from 3 to 4 miles. And for me, walking, I do better praying when I walk. When I sit down, I can fall asleep. I get tired. I get distracted. But walking helps me. And so those are just, I think, mixing it up and trying different things. And there's certain things that I will do more often than not, because they just work for me.
What's one quality you would encourage somebody to search for in their everyday life? So I guess, what's a habit, I guess?
Yeah, there are these things called spiritual practices. The old language was spiritual disciplines, and some people don't like the word discipline, so we more talk about practices. To use the gym analogy again, it's like there are certain weight machines and everything, and if you want to run a marathon, well, you're going to go through a different training program than you will if you want to build muscle mass, okay? I think there are a lot of spiritual practices that these are the things Jesus did. And when we do the things Jesus did, we are more likely to experience God's presence and transformation. So, like for me, silence and solitude, how I begin my day, reading scripture, prayer, fasting. Fasting is, where you voluntarily go without food for a particular time so you can devote more time to prayer. That's a spiritual practice. Of course, gathering with others in worship, that's a practice. Serving, giving. So there's a lot of different practices, and the church is much more aware of these spiritual practices today than, say, when I started ministry 38 years ago. It's great to see them become much more commonly used and practiced, which I'm encouraged by that.
Going back, I think his second question, how do you study the Bible to prepare for a sermon? How do you do that without thinking of it as work or running out of ideas?
Well, that's a great question, because I do it differently. I separate the two. When I read the Bible in the mornings, and it's usually for me in the morning, I'm doing that to hear from God. This is me, Ron Watts, the disciple of Jesus. When I get to the office, I'll study the Bible for my sermon, and I'll take notes and I'll read commentaries. I like to keep the two apart. Now, that's not to say that they don't intersect, because sometimes I'm reading a passage in the morning and I thought, wow, that's a great insight in that, and I may need to share that one day. I have many inspirations, but there's a difference when you're reading the Bible to hear from the Lord, and it's you. I love the old description of the Bible as God's love letter to us. And that's different than reading it academically for purposes of study to teach others. Yeah. And I try to, for me, it has been helpful through the years to separate the two. Yeah.
And there's a scripture about, I think it's in Revelation, they overcame the enemy, the devil, by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. Mm-hmm. Can you think of a couple of situations in your own life when God has been so present or so powerful or worked a miracle or something happened that caused it's become like a great pearl to you or a great treasure that when you're going through a difficulty, you can look back at that and it just kind of lifts you or encourages?
Gosh, there's so many. And you know, the first ones that always come to mind are the trials and the hard times. When we had 2 children, we knew we wanted more, and my wife had 2 miscarriages in a row over a period of 12 months. And that was hard, and especially for my wife. It was hard to see her struggle. And yet we grew through that time, grew in our love for each other and our marriage, and saw God's faithfulness. That was very early. We were still meeting in the theater as a church, so we were in our early 30s. And then, you know, I think of not long ago during the pandemic, and churches were experiencing so much difficulty. It was such a hard time. And there were times, you know, when the whole world shut down in 2020 and churches stopped meeting for a while. And there were times I was so afraid, and so I would get up in the middle of the night. I couldn't sleep, and I'd wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning, and I'd just be on my knees in desperation, praying to the Lord. And I look back, and that was a hard time, but it was also precious because God met me there. And I don't want to go through it again, but I look back at it, and God's hand was so present during those hard times. And a lot of pastors will tell you how many hard things they faced, and they lost so much during that season. But again, when I look back at the faithfulness of God, it's almost always through a hard time. I'm sure I've learned things through the good times. I just don't remember those lessons as well as I do through the bad times, you know?
So are you saying you experience him the most throughout your life in those extreme, difficult situations?
Yeah, and I think what it is, it's desperation.
Oh.
Because the fact is, we're desperate for God. We control so little. I mean, really, what was Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust, who wrote that the only thing we can control is our attitude, because he was put in prison. Everything was taken from him, even his clothes. It was dehumanizing how they treated people in the Holocaust. And a lot of times when things are good and you're winning and everything's successful, you start to be kind of confident. It's like, oh yeah, this is God. I got this. I got it under control. No, you don't. In the blink of an eye, everything you have can be taken from you. And the truth is, that's always true, but it's hard times that remind us, and we need God. And it's in those times when I've been desperate, because I've been at this almost 4 decades now, and you get kind of good at it for a while, and you can get comfortable with your skills. But it's when everything is threatened, and you say, I need you, Jesus, that it's in those moments when I have felt the presence of God more clearly, because I'm reminded of what's always true. I'm not in control. God is. And there's something, hard times make us face that reality, Now, I've had several people recently who've had terrible, health, diagnosed with terrible, cancer or something, and it's so advanced. Like our friend Melanie, one day, here's this healthy person, and that can be any of us.
Yeah.
And we need Jesus.
Climbing mountain hikes, going through the Rockies one year, and then the next year finding out she has a bone marrow. Better shape than most of us. Yes.
And in the blink of an eye, and it's just a reminder that God is God, and we're not, and we need Him. We're desperate for Him.
So I guess to kind of wrap it up, what would you say is one place in the Bible you will always point somebody who's not a Christian, or somebody who's new to the faith, or even just somebody who's been in church their whole life? Where's somewhere that you would point them to go study?
That's good. I'm sorry to cut you off.
Yeah,
good.
You're good.
Okay. I think for a person who's not a Christian, I would point them to the Gospels, probably Luke or John, because I think a person who's not sure about Jesus needs to encounter Jesus. I wouldn't send them to Leviticus, that's kind of tough reading. I'd send them to there because I'd want them to fall in love with Jesus. And that's always my go-to. But for the typical Christian, I send them to the Psalms. One practice I've had for most of my Christian life is I read a psalm a day. Whatever else I'm reading in the Bible, I read a psalm a day. And the Psalms have been my lifeline during those hard times. The Psalms, written 3,000 years ago, still resonate. How many people at a funeral, they want Psalm 23 read, or 121? Why? Because every emotion known to human beings is in the Psalms. And it's raw and it's real. And I just find so much meaning reading those Psalms I can't tell you how many times exactly what I need to hear that day I read in that Psalm.
Do you have a favorite?
Yeah, you can't beat Psalm 23. I guess it's for different times. But yeah, it's hard for me to, it's like say, which of your 4 kids are your favorite? I wouldn't have one, It's hard to pick, that's a great, Psalm 121, Psalm 90. I read Psalm 90 every New Year's Day. That's where it says, teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Kind of being in touch with your own mortality. When I'm jubilant, read the latter Psalms, like the 140s and 150. And there's so much good stuff there.
I know you said to wrap it up, but I still have another question too. I want to focus briefly, and we do only have just a couple minutes left, I think, for this time. But family. Tell me a little bit about how you see and function with family as your primary mission, and how has ministry impacted that?
It does. There's no doubt ministry does impact your family. I tried to keep, though, my kids, I wanted them to experience a normal life, even though Dad was this pastor and preaching in front of people, For one thing, my marriage has been a priority. Lynn and I will, next month, we'll celebrate 42 years.
Yay.
And so I'm blessed with a wonderful wife and a wonderful marriage. And we have been intentional about giving time to each other. And when you're busy, and there's always something demanding your time, you'll never have free time. You have to make time. So when the kids were young, especially, we made sure we did date night. That we would go and have time just for us, because you're always around the kids. And that looks differently now in the empty nest era. My kids, my biggest thing was that I wanted them to know Jesus, because I could give myself to the church and lose my kids. And so I prayed every day. In fact, it was a seminary professor. She and her husband were missionaries in the Congo for like 30 years, and then they came back. They had PhDs, and they came back later in life and taught in seminary. And she taught me a prayer before we ever had kids. And it was a prayer that I prayed almost every day for my kids. Of all the things, my kids, Stephanie, Anthony, David, Ryan, of all the things that Stephanie loves, may she love you most of all. And of all the things she treasures, may she treasure you above all. And I've just seen God faithfully answer. My 4 kids all love Jesus. They're active. One of my sons is starting a church, and they're all involved in their church. And my grandkids are being raised to know Jesus. And to me, I get the most joy and satisfaction out of that.
Yeah.
And my family, because, our primary responsibility is our family. We tell our parents at church, we get your kids for 1 hour a week. That's if you even come every week. You get them all the time. And so thank you for asking that, because in your first job as a disciple of Jesus is not to be a pastor and serve others. It's to disciple your family. And now they're discipling me. I'll call my son sometimes, hey, what do you think about this? And he's got wisdom, he's got some stuff to share, so it's good. And being a grandparent's the best of all.
Well, I know for me, I'm receiving a lot of good things from you, and I feel really honored and humbled because I know that you're a man who's put God first in your life.
Well, thank you.
And then have influenced so many others for eternity. Yeah. And I just feel grateful, really grateful.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
This was fun today.
Yeah.
It was.